You reach into the medicine cabinet at 2 in the morning, and the little bottle of cough syrup is almost empty. You paid $9 for it last week. Your throat still burns, and the bottle is basically sugar water with a warning label. Here is what I could not believe until I tested it with my own hands. A single plant, one that costs about $1 and probably sits in your kitchen cupboard right now, did more for a raw throat, a stubborn chest, cold, and a cut that would not close than most of the things I had been buying for 20 years. I doubted every single word of that sentence when I first heard it. This is not some new invention. It is old. So old that it is written into a book printed in 1611, and it was named Plant by Plant by a botanist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem who spent his whole life proving which plants the ancient world actually held in their hands. Stay with me, because the part that shocked me most comes straight out of a book published in 1952, and it will change the way you look at your own spice rack tonight. And you do not need to buy anything fancy. You already own this, or you can pick it up for pocket change. I still remember standing in my kitchen last winter, holding a little jar of dried green flakes I had been shaking onto pizza for a decade, and actually laughing out loud when I finally understood what that jar really was. I had walked past the answer 1,000 times. I had seasoned my dinner with it. And I had no idea that the same plant was the one people reached for thousands of years ago when there was no pharmacy, no doctor down the road, and no other choice. So let me tell you exactly what I set out to disprove, because I went into this convinced it was nonsense. The plant everyone points to in the old texts is called hyssop. And for most of my life, if you had said the word hyssop to me, I would have pictured some exotic, mysterious herb that only grew on a hillside in the Holy Land, long gone, impossible to find, the kind of thing you read about but never touch. That was my assumption. I figured it was one of those lost plants nobody could even identify anymore, a name without a real leaf attached to it. I was wrong. And the way I found out I was wrong is what pulled me down this whole path. Hyssop shows up over and over in the oldest writing we have. In the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 22, people are told to take a bunch of hyssop, dip it, and mark their doorways. In the 51st Psalm, there is that famous line, "Cleanse me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." In the Gospel of John, chapter 19, hyssop appears again at the very end. This plant was not decoration. It was central. It was the plant of cleansing, of purification, of making something unclean into something safe. Now, here is where it gets interesting, and here is where I stopped thinking of this as a fairy tale. Scholars argued for centuries about what hyssop actually was. The Hebrew word is izov, and a botanist named Michael Zohri, who taught at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and wrote a serious, careful book called Plants of the Bible, laid out the case that the izov of those ancient texts was not some vanished mystery herb at all. It was a plant in the mint family that still grows all over the eastern Mediterranean today. Its botanical name is Oreganum syriacum, Syrian oregano, the same family as the flakes in that little jar on my counter. The same aromatic oil, the same sharp, clean, almost medicine-like smell you get when you crush the leaf between your fingers. When I read that, I did exactly what you are probably doing right now. I said, no, surely not. Surely the plant of the sacred cleansing rituals is not the same thing I sprinkle on spaghetti. But the more I dug, the more the pieces locked together. And an American botanist named Harold Moldinke, along with his wife Alma, wrote their own landmark book, also called Plants of the Bible, published in 1952, walking through the ancient references and the living plants they matched to. These were not mystics. These were scientists cataloging what actually grew where and what people actually used it for. The trail kept pointing back to the same humble, aromatic, mint family plant that any of us can grow in a pot on a windowsill. So I decided to stop reading and start testing. And my first test was the simplest one I could think of. The sore throat, I had a cold coming on, that scratchy, swelling feeling at the back of the throat, the one you know is about to turn into 3 miserable days. Normally, I would have driven to the store and spent $10 or $12 on lozenges and syrup. Instead, I took 1 heaping teaspoon of plain dried oregano, the cooking kind, poured hot water over it, covered the cup so the steam could not escape, and let it sit for 10 minutes. Then I strained it and sipped it slowly, breathing the vapor in as I drank. I am not going to lie to you and tell you angels sang, but within about 20 minutes, the raw, swollen feeling in my throat had genuinely calmed down. It was not a placebo shrug. The heat, the aromatic oil coming off that steam, the warmth of it, all of it together settled the fire in my throat better than the last 3 sore throat products I had paid real money for. And it cost me, at most, 15 cents worth of a spice I already owned. That was the moment my skepticism cracked, because if this $1 plant could do that, I had one very uncomfortable question. Why had nobody ever told me? And that is where this story stops being cute and starts making me a little angry. Think about it. This is a plant named in the oldest text we have as the plant of cleansing. It grows like a weed. It costs almost nothing. A botanist at one of the most respected universities in the world confirmed what it was. And yet somehow, the knowledge that the herb on your pizza is a serious antimicrobial got quietly filed away under old wives' tales, folk superstition, the sort of thing your grandmother believed because she did not know any better. Here is the thing nobody wants to say out loud. There is no money in a plant you can grow in a coffee can. There is no patent on oregano. Nobody can own it. Nobody can mark it up 400%. And nobody can run a glossy commercial for something you can buy for $1 in the baking aisle. The moment a remedy cannot be sold at a profit, it stops getting talked about. It does not get suppressed with a dramatic conspiracy. It just gets quietly forgotten, allowed to slip out of common knowledge, because no company on earth has a reason to remind you it exists. That silence is not an accident. It is just what happens when something is too cheap to be worth advertising. So I kept going, because now I wanted to know if there was real science under the old ritual, or if I had just gotten lucky with a warm cup of tea. There is, and it is not vague. The active compound in oregano is called carvacrol. It is the oil that gives the plant that sharp, unmistakable bite. And carvacrol has been studied seriously in real laboratories by real researchers. There is a well-known line of research connected to Georgetown University, work associated with a researcher named Harry Preuss, looking at oregano oil and its effect on bacteria and fungal organisms. In laboratory testing, that oregano compound went up against some genuinely nasty microbes, including strains that had learned to shrug off ordinary antibiotics, and it held its own. In some of that work, oregano oil was compared against standard antimicrobial agents and performed at a level nobody expected from a kitchen herb. Let me be honest and careful with you, because I promised you the truth and not a sales pitch. A study in a laboratory dish is not the same as a cure sitting in your cupboard. I am not a doctor. I am not telling you to throw away your prescriptions or skip the emergency room. That is not what this is. What I am telling you is that the ancient world was not being foolish or superstitious when it treated this plant as something powerful. They could not name carvacrol. They had never seen a bacterium under a microscope. But they had watched, over thousands of years, what this plant did, and they respected it enough to write it into their most important rituals of cleansing. They knew the what, even though they did not know the why. We finally know the why. And somehow, in the trade, we managed to forget the what. That gap, that space between what those ancient people knew from experience and what our laboratories only recently confirmed, is exactly the thing that has cost regular families like yours and mine real money for generations. Think of every dollar spent on a specialty rinse, a specialty ointment, a specialty syrup, when a plant in the cabinet was carrying the same working principle the whole time. But knowing the science did not satisfy me. I wanted to know how far this went, so I pushed the test harder. The next thing I tried was steam. When that same cold moved down into my chest and my nose closed up completely, I took a big handful of dried oregano, about 2 tablespoons, and dropped it into a bowl of water I had just boiled. Then I leaned over the bowl, draped a bath towel over my head to make a little tent, closed my eyes, and breathed the vapor in slowly for about 10 minutes. Not too close, because steam can scald you, and never with a child unattended, so please be sensible about the heat. And honestly, that question is what pushed me to go much deeper than a single cup of tea, digging through old botanical records, laboratory findings, and ancient texts until the whole picture finally came together. If you want to explore that full picture at your own pace, I put everything into a digital book called Smart Basics. It walks through the plants, the history, and the practical applications in far more detail than any single video can hold. You can find the link in the description below. Now back to the part that genuinely started making me angry. The relief was immediate and it was real. My sinuses opened. That thick, blocked underwater feeling in my head cleared enough that I could actually breathe through my nose for the first time in 2 days. The aromatic oils carry right up into your airways on that steam, and they do exactly what those expensive vapor rubs are trying to imitate with their menthol and eucalyptus. Except I was doing it with a spice that cost a fraction as much, and I could pronounce every single ingredient. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right about now, because I thought it too. You are thinking this sounds like it is for people with time and fresh herbs and a fancy kitchen and money to experiment. You are thinking this is not for you, because you do not have special equipment, you do not have a garden, and you are not about to go order some expensive bottle of essential oil off the internet just to test a theory from a stranger. I hear you. So this next part is built specifically for you, the person who wants to try something tonight with nothing but what is already in your house right now. You do not need fresh oregano. You do not need a plant or a pot or a windowsill full of sun. That dusty jar of dried oregano in the back of your cabinet, the one that has been there since who knows when, still carries the oils. Dried herbs hold their active compounds surprisingly well, especially the aromatic ones like this. So here is the entire toolkit: a jar of dried oregano, hot water, a bowl, a towel, a spoon. That is it. Everything I have described so far, the throat tea and the steam tent, costs you nothing beyond what is already sitting in your kitchen, and it takes less than 15 minutes. And here is one more that surprised me, because it turns a cheap herb into something that lasts for months. I took a small glass jar and filled it with plain honey, then stirred in a couple of tablespoons of dried oregano, sealed it, and left it in a cupboard for 2 weeks, giving it a shake every day or so. What you end up with is an oregano-infused honey. Honey on its own is already an old, proven soother for a raw throat, something people have used for wound care and sore throats for literally thousands of years. Combine it with the oregano oils, and you have a spoonful of something that coats your throat, tastes far better than any syrup I ever bought, and sits on your shelf ready for the next time someone in the house wakes up croaking. Total cost, maybe $1 or $2 for a jar that outlasts 3 or 4 store-bought bottles. I made that honey out of pure curiosity. It is now the first thing my whole household reaches for when a throat starts to go. And every time I unscrew that lid, I think about how many years I spent handing money over at the counter for a problem I could have solved with 2 ingredients and a 2-week wait. But none of that, not the tea, not the steam, not even the honey, is the thing that truly stopped me cold. The thing that made me sit down and stare at the wall for a minute came from going back to that oldest source of all and reading it again with new eyes. Because here is what I finally understood, and it is the piece almost nobody connects. Go back to the book of Leviticus, chapter 14. In that ancient text, there is a procedure described in careful, step-by-step detail for what to do about a house that has a spreading, greenish, creeping stain in its walls. In the old translations, they call it a plague in the house or a leprosy of the house. Read it plainly, and it is unmistakable. They are describing mildew. They are describing mold spreading across the stone and plaster of a home. And what does the priest use as part of the procedure to cleanse that house of the creeping stain? Hyssop, the same plant, the oregano plant. Now hold that next to what those laboratories found. Carvacrol, the oil in oregano, is not just antibacterial. It is antifungal. It fights mold. It fights the exact kind of creeping growth that ruins walls and makes a home unhealthy to live in. Do you see it? Thousands of years before anyone knew what a fungal spore was, thousands of years before Louis Pasteur and germ theory, before microscopes, before anybody could explain a single thing about why it worked, people were reaching for the one plant in their world whose oils actually kill mold, and using it to treat a moldy house. And they were reaching for that same plant to mark doorways against sickness and to symbolize the washing away of impurity. Their rituals of cleansing were built, without their ever knowing the chemistry, around a genuine, measurable disinfectant. That is not superstition. That is thousands of years of careful observation passed down and written into the most protected text they had precisely so it would not be lost. They preserved it the only way they knew how. They wrapped the practical knowledge inside the sacred so it would be copied by hand, generation after generation, and never thrown away. And it survived. It survived for us. Then we came along with our modern convenience and our shopping aisles, and we very nearly let the meaning of it slip through our fingers, treating the plant as nothing more than a pizza topping. When I understood that, I tested it myself, of course, because that is the whole point of what I do. I had a musty spot in the corner of a damp closet, the kind of faint mildew smell that never fully goes away. I made a strong oregano infusion, steeped extra strong and cooled, put it in a spray bottle, wiped the area down first, then sprayed it and let it dry. I am not going to promise you it works like an industrial product, and for any serious mold problem, you absolutely need proper professional help because mold is nothing to gamble with. But that faint, stubborn, musty smell that had been living in that corner, it faded. The plant did quietly, for pennies, a piece of the exact job those ancient people trusted it to do. That is the moment my skepticism died completely. Not the tea, not the steam. It was realizing that a procedure written down more than 2,000 years ago, one that scholars and everyone else had filed away as strange old ritual, was actually a working antifungal treatment, and that modern laboratory science only caught up to it in our own lifetimes. So let me tell you plainly where I landed after all of this, because the title of what you clicked on made a big promise, and I owe you honesty. No. A $1 plant does not heal any illness instantly and forever. Nothing does. And anyone who tells you otherwise is reaching for your wallet. But that is not really the discovery here. The real discovery, the thing that genuinely shocked me, is how much this single, ancient, dirt-cheap plant actually does. How deep and how real the knowledge behind it runs, and how completely we were allowed to forget it. The forgetting is the scandal, not because anyone locked it in a vault, but because a thing you can grow in a coffee can will never have a marketing budget. And in our world, if nobody profits from reminding you, you simply stop being reminded. I spent years and hundreds of dollars solving problems that a plant named in a book from 1611, identified by a scientist in 1952, and confirmed in a modern university laboratory, had already solved for the price of a cup of coffee. That is the part that stays with me. So here is what I want you to take from the time you spent with me. You did not just learn a trick for a sore throat. You reached back and picked up something that was almost taken from you. a piece of knowledge your great-grandparents very likely still had, and that got quietly traded away for the convenience of a checkout counter. You are the kind of person who tests a claim instead of trusting a price tag. That is exactly why you made it all the way to the end of this, while everyone chasing the easy answer clicked away long ago. Now, I want to hear from you, and I want you to actually tell me, because this audience is quiet and I have to ask you directly. Here is my question. That jar of dried oregano in your kitchen right now, how long has it been sitting there? And had you ever, even once, imagined it was the same plant written into those ancient cleansing rituals? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want, tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I am genuinely curious how far this old knowledge has traveled. Leave a comment. I read them. If any part of this made you look twice at something you already own, then you belong here, with the rest of us who are done being sold expensive answers to problems the old world already solved for pennies. Subscribe and stand with the people who test the old ways and take back the knowledge that was quietly slipped out of our hands. Because the next plant I put to the test is one that was used to keep bread from going moldy for weeks without a refrigerator, and when I tried it in my own kitchen, the result honestly did not seem possible. I will show you exactly what happened. Do not miss it. Now, this video gave you the story of hyssop, but inside the Old Ways Almanac, I take you all the way through the full remedy method, the exact steps from my own kitchen. And when you have a question, you can ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You'll belong right alongside so many Old Ways folks like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime with one click. If this helped you, I'd love for you to subscribe and stay a while. I have many more simple, natural remedies waiting for you right here whenever you're ready to learn more.